Antarctica becoming warmer, and the death rate of West old-growth forests have doubled. Challenging warming skeptics who note that parts of Antarctica have gotten colder, researchers have now reported that overall, yes, overall, the continent has gotten warmer since the 1950s, and that even those colder spots would be warmer were it not for the ozone hole. Contrarians have sometimes grabbed onto this idea that the entire continent of Antarctica is cooling. So how could we be talking about global warming? Said the study co-author Michael Mann, director of the Earth System Science Center at Penn State University. And now we can say, no, it's not true. It's not bucking the trend. The study does not point to man-made climate change as a cause of the Antarctic warming. Singling out a cause is a highly intricate scientific process, although it is very likely. But a different and smaller study out late last year did make that connection. We can't pin it down, but it certainly is consistent with the influence of greenhouse gases from fossil fuels, said NASA scientist Drew Shindell, another study co-author. Some of the effects also could be natural variability. He said, the study showed that Antarctica, about 1.5 times bigger than the United States, remains a very complicated weather picture, especially with only a handful of monitoring stations in its vast interior. The researchers used satellite data and mathematical formulas to fill in missing information that made outside scientists somewhat nervous about making large conclusions with such sparse information. Shindell said the study, published in the peer-reviewed journal Nature, was more comprehensive than past studies and jibed with computer models. West versus East. The research found that since 1957, the annual temperature for the entire continent of Antarctica has warmed by approximately 1 degree Fahrenheit. The Antarctic Peninsula in West Antarctica has long been known to be warming, but the study noted that all of West Antarctica is about 20 degrees warmer than the East and has warmed nearly twice as fast, said the study lead author. Significant warming extends well beyond the Antarctic Peninsula to cover most of West Antarctica, an area of warming much larger than previously reported. The authors wrote, 10 ice sheets on the Antarctic Peninsula have receded or collapsed since the 1990s. The Wilkins ice sheet is poised to break up, held in place by a sliver of ice 1,500 feet wide compared to 70 miles in the 1950s. East Antarctica, which scientists had long thought to be cooling, is warming slightly when yearly averages are looked at over the past 50 years. However, autumn temperatures in East Antarctica are cooling slightly over the long term, probably due to the ozone hole. Efforts to repair the ozone layer eventually will begin taking effect, and the hole could be eliminated by the middle of this century. And if that happens, all, yes, all of Antarctica could begin warming on a par with the rest of the world. The study has major ramifications for sea level rise, said Andrew Weaver at the University of Victoria in Canada. Most major sea level rise projections for the future counted on a cooling, not warming Antarctica. This will make sea level rise much worse, Weaver said. Again, this will definitely make sea level rise much worse. Antarctica's ice contains enough frozen water to raise world sea levels by approximately 190 feet if it all melted, so even a tiny amount of melting could threaten Pacific Island states or coastal cities from Beijing to London. West Antarctica is particularly vulnerable because its ice sheet is grounded below sea level and surrounded by floating ice shelves. If that ice sheet completely melted, global sea level would rise by at least 16 to 20 feet. Shindell predicted that West Antarctica will eventually melt over a period of time if warming like this continues. A 5.4 Fahrenheit degree rise could trigger a wide melt of West Antarctica, he said. And the death rate of West's old-growth forest has doubled. Experts suspect global warming and fear a prelude to much bigger, more abrupt changes. The mortality rate of old-growth forests across the West has more than doubled in recent decades, and those forests are now losing more trees than they gain, according to a new study that identified the most probable cause as warming temperatures. The trend is happening at every elevation in trees of different sizes and of various species. Researchers with the U.S. Geological Survey and universities have reported in the peer-reviewed journal Science. Our long-term monitoring shows that tree mortality has been climbing while the establishment of replacement trees has not. A USGS scientist, a co-leader of the research team, has said tree mortality doubled in just 17 years in the Pacific Northwest and 25 years in California. Mortality rates in states further inland took 29 years to double. The authors also ruled out several factors, including air pollution, crowding, and fire suppression impacts, as being significant drivers, since the trend has been consistent in all areas and among all age groups studied. Moreover, because mortality increased in small trees, the overall increase in mortality rates cannot be attributed solely to aging of large trees, the researchers wrote in Science. And in contrast, increasing regional temperature during that time was correlated with tree deaths or die-offs. Regional warming and consequent increases in water deficits that are likely contributors to the increases in tree mortality rates, the researchers said. Average temperature in the West rose by more than 1 degree Fahrenheit over the last few decades. While this may not sound like much, it has been enough to reduce winter snowpack and cause earlier snowmelt and lengthen the summer drought. That warming also favors insects like the mountain pine beetle, which has devoured forests in recent years, and the effects compound over time. The long-term impact could mean thinner forests, smaller trees, and changed habitat for animals. Tree death rates are like interest on a bank account. The effects compound over time. A doubling of death rates eventually could reduce average tree size or tree age in a forest by half, and thus reducing average tree size. That may be our biggest concern. Is the trend we're seeing a prelude to bigger, more abrupt changes to our forests? It's very possible. Forests can probably maintain functional capacity as long as they don't go over a tipping point, but the tipping point looks like it's about to be reached. And tracking vital signs like mortality are vital to figuring out where that tipping point is. Carbon sources. The researchers also noted that the high mortality rate could turn western forests from carbon sinks, where they absorb the greenhouse gas, into carbon sources, emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as they die, further speeding up the pace of global warming. Yes, speeding up the pace of global warming. And All these are connected to everything else that's going on in the world, and these are more end times, transition days, more signs.